In 1939, the United States was a very different country than the one we know today. The scars of the Great Depression were still fresh. Millions had lost their jobs, homes, and savings. Breadlines and unemployment defined everyday life for many Americans. The economy was just beginning to recover, and the focus was almost entirely domestic. Internationally, the U.S. kept its distance. After the trauma of World War I, most Americans wanted nothing to do with foreign wars or global politics. The country was inward-looking, divided over how to deal with economic and social challenges, and far from being a dominant force on the world stage. But then came World War II, and in just 6 years, the United States would undergo a complete transformation. Economically, militarily, and politically, America rose from crisis to global superpower. Before World War II, the United States was not the global powerhouse we think of today. In fact, it was quite the opposite. The country was focused inward, grappling with one of the worst economic disasters in its history, the Great Depression. After the end of World War I in 1918, the U.S. had largely withdrawn from international affairs. It didn't join the League of Nations, it passed strict immigration laws, and it embraced a foreign policy known as isolationism, believing that involvement in European conflicts had only brought pain and little reward. Throughout the 1920s and into the early 1930s, the American economy spiraled downward. The stock market crashed in 1929, triggering a financial collapse that spread across the nation. Banks failed, businesses shut down, families lost everything. By 1933, unemployment had reached a staggering 25%. That meant 1 in 4 Americans was out of work. Breadlines stretched around city blocks. Farmers couldn't sell their crops. Even the middle class felt the sting of poverty. In the face of all this turmoil, America's military was small and underfunded. The U.S. Army ranked 17th in the world, smaller than Portugal's. Most Americans didn't see the point in spending money on a strong military, especially when so many people were struggling just to survive. The idea of entering another foreign war was deeply unpopular. The horrors of World War I were still vivid in the public's memory. Trenches, poison gas, senseless bloodshed. There was a widespread belief that Europe's problems should stay in Europe. President Franklin D. Roosevelt, elected in 1932, stepped into this crisis with bold ideas. His New Deal programs aimed to pull the country out of economic disaster. Massive public works projects, social security, banking reforms, they were all part of his vision to rebuild the nation from the ground up. And while FDR brought a sense of hope and direction, America was still not thinking like a world leader. The focus remained domestic, fixing the economy, creating jobs, and avoiding foreign entanglements. In short, the United States in the 1930s was a recovering, cautious, and inward-facing nation, not yet the superpower it would soon become. When World War II erupted in 1939, the United States made a deliberate choice to stay out of it. The trauma of World War I was still fresh, and most Americans wanted no part in another distant conflict. So, officially, the U.S. remained neutral, but neutrality didn't mean inaction. Behind the scenes, America was already laying the groundwork to support the Allied cause. President Franklin D. Roosevelt understood the growing threat of Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan. And though the U.S. wasn't sending troops, it was sending something else: weapons, vehicles, and critical supplies. Through the Lend-Lease Act, passed in 1941, the United States began funneling billions of dollars worth of support to its future allies, most notably Britain and the Soviet Union. Ships carried tanks across the Atlantic. Factories churned out airplanes destined for European skies. Ammunition and raw materials were loaded up and shipped out. This wasn't just charity, it was strategy. Helping the Allies survive meant stopping the spread of fascism. And in doing so, America's industrial base was reignited. The demand for production put people back to work and gave a huge boost to the U.S. economy, even before a single American soldier entered the fight. But then, the illusion of distance was shattered. On December 7, 1941, the Japanese launched a surprise attack on the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. Battleships burned. Over 2,400 Americans were killed. The next day, President Roosevelt addressed the nation, calling it a date which will live in infamy. That attack changed everything. The United States was no longer on the sidelines. In a single moment, it was thrust into the most devastating war the world had ever seen. And from that day forward, America would never be the same. What followed after America entered World War II was nothing short of one of the greatest industrial transformations in human history. In just a few short years, the United States turned itself into the beating heart of Allied production. A sleeping industrial giant had awakened, and it earned a new name: the Arsenal of Democracy. Factories that once made cars, appliances, and consumer goods were retooled overnight. Ford, once famous for its Model T, began rolling tanks and military trucks off its assembly lines. In California, Boeing mass-produced bombers at such speed that a brand new aircraft was completed every hour at the peak of production. And this wasn't just a shift in machines, it was a shift in people. With millions of men overseas fighting, American women stepped into roles they had never held before, working as welders, machinists, and engineers. Rosie the Riveter became the face of this new workforce. For the first time, entire industries were powered by women. The scale of this transformation is hard to imagine. Between 1941 and 1945, the United States produced over 300,000 aircraft, fighter planes, bombers, and transport planes that filled the skies of Europe and the Pacific. More than 100,000 tanks, rolling steel beasts that pushed back Nazi forces and liberated occupied nations. 2.4 million military trucks, moving soldiers, supplies, and artillery across continents. And an astonishing 40 billion rounds of ammunition, enough to keep armies firing for years. Factories operated 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The war effort wasn't just supported by the government, it was a national mission that involved everyone. School children collected scrap metal. Housewives grew victory gardens. Entire cities revolved around production lines. But this industrial miracle wasn't just about winning the war. It left behind something even more powerful: a permanent shift in the American economy. The infrastructure, innovation, and workforce expansion created during the war years laid the foundation for decades of economic dominance. America had discovered just how fast and how big it could build, and that momentum didn't stop when the war ended. In fact, many historians argue that this wartime mobilization was the true birth of modern American economic power. The tools of war became the tools of prosperity. While the United States was booming, much of the rest of the world was experiencing the exact opposite: total devastation. Across Europe, entire nations lay in ruins. Cities like Berlin, Warsaw, and London had been reduced to rubble by years of relentless bombing. Streets that once bustled with life became piles of ash and stone. Historic landmarks were destroyed. Millions were left homeless. In the Pacific, Japan suffered unimaginable destruction. American firebombing campaigns flattened cities like Tokyo, killing tens of thousands in a single night. And then came Hiroshima and Nagasaki, two atomic bombs that changed the course of history in just seconds. Japan's cities were shattered, and so was its military. And then there was the Soviet Union. Though it would emerge as a military power, the cost was staggering. Over 20 million people, soldiers and civilians, lost their lives. Entire regions were laid waste. The USSR may have survived, but it was deeply wounded. In contrast, the United States had emerged from the war almost completely untouched on the home front. No American cities had been bombed, no factories destroyed. In fact, America's economy was thriving like never before. Its industries were bigger, stronger, and more efficient than ever. The U.S. military had become the largest and most advanced in the world. And thanks to wartime production and global demand, American businesses were booming. By the end of the war, the United States controlled nearly half of the world's total wealth. Think about that. One country, holding 50% of global economic power. Its only true rival on the world stage was the Soviet Union, a nation that had been devastated by war and operated under a completely different ideology. The capitalist West and the communist East were now on a collision course. And just like that, the stage was set. The United States had not only survived the war, it had emerged as the most powerful nation on Earth. Global dominance wasn't a dream anymore. It was reality. So, what did the United States do with this new global power? It didn't retreat back into isolation. Instead, America stepped forward and began shaping a brand new world order, one that reflected its values, its interests, and its vision for the future. First, the U.S. helped establish the United Nations, a global organization aimed at preventing future wars and promoting peace and cooperation. Unlike after World War I, this time America took a leading role, even hosting the UN's headquarters in New York City. Next came the economic institutions that would define global finance for decades, the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. Both were designed to stabilize economies, encourage development, and prevent the kind of economic chaos that had led to fascism and war in the 1930s. But America didn't stop at creating institutions. It invested directly in rebuilding the world. Through the Marshall Plan, the U.S. poured over $13 billion, more than $150 billion in today's money, into rebuilding war-torn Europe. Roads, factories, railways, power grids, all restored with American money, American expertise, and American goods. This wasn't just charity, it was smart diplomacy. It prevented the rise of communism in Western Europe and created loyal trading partners for years to come. Then came the military response to a new threat, the Soviet Union. In 1949, the U.S. helped create NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, a military alliance designed to counterbalance Soviet influence and protect democratic nations from potential aggression. It marked a permanent American presence in European defense. At the same time, the U.S. was investing heavily in science and technology. Wartime innovations led to peacetime revolutions. Government-backed research programs laid the groundwork for the space race, the rise of Silicon Valley, and eventually American dominance in technology and innovation. And while all this was happening, the U.S. dollar quietly became the world's reserve currency, a status that gave America immense control over international trade and finance. Most global transactions were now done in dollars, and U.S. economic policy could influence markets across the planet. In just a few years, America had gone from a nation focused on survival to the architect of the modern world. But not every part of America's rise to power was celebrated, or even widely understood. While the victory in World War II marked a new era of global leadership, it also ushered in a more complex, more controversial chapter in American history. At the heart of this transformation was the rapid growth of what President Dwight D. Eisenhower would later call the military-industrial complex, a powerful network of defense contractors, military leaders, and government agencies. Fueled by Cold War tensions, this system ensured that America was always preparing for the next conflict. It created jobs, it spurred technological advancement, but it also made war and the threat of war an enduring feature of American life. The arms race with the Soviet Union intensified. Nuclear weapons stockpiled, missiles aimed, doomsday clocks ticked. The world now lived under the constant shadow of total destruction. And beyond open warfare, the U.S. began using covert methods to project its influence. Through the CIA and other agencies, America orchestrated regime changes in countries like Iran, Guatemala, and Chile, toppling governments seen as threats to Western interests. These operations were rarely acknowledged, but their consequences were long-lasting, fueling distrust, anti-American sentiment, and in some cases, decades of instability. The Cold War wasn't fought on one battlefield. It was fought in proxy wars across the globe. Korea, Vietnam, Latin America, Africa. The US and the Soviet Union would back opposing sides, pouring in weapons, money, and support, all in the name of ideology. Back home, the unity that had defined the war years began to fray. The fear of communism sparked a wave of suspicion and repression. The Red Scare and McCarthyism led to blacklists, investigations, and ruined lives. Racial tensions, economic inequality, and political divisions all began bubbling beneath the surface. Being a superpower brought prestige, but also pressure. America was now responsible for maintaining global peace, leading democratic movements, and defending its interests everywhere. That kind of power didn't come without consequences, so while the post-war period was marked by triumph, prosperity, and influence, it also revealed the high cost of dominance. Because rising to the top of the world stage is one thing, staying there is something else entirely. World War II didn't just reshape global borders, it transformed America at its core. Before the war, the United States was still recovering from the Great Depression. It was cautious, inward-looking, and hesitant to get involved in overseas conflicts. But everything changed after the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941. That moment thrust America onto the world stage, and it never looked back. The war effort mobilized the entire nation. Factories boomed, unemployment vanished, and millions of Americans joined the military or went to work supporting it from home. Women entered the workforce in record numbers, and industries retooled to produce tanks, planes, and ships at an astonishing pace. But the transformation didn't end with victory. When the war was over, the U.S. emerged as the world's strongest economic and military power. It helped build new alliances like NATO, shaped global institutions like the United Nations and the World Bank, and became a leader in rebuilding war-torn nations, including its former enemies. The Cold War, the rise of modern capitalism, even the conflicts we see today, all trace back to choices made in the 1940s. In just a few short years, World War II turned the United States from a cautious observer into a global superpower. And the effects of that transformation are still with us today. If you found this story compelling, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more untold stories of history. Let us know in the comments, what surprised you most about America's rise after World War II?